Secretary of State for External Affairs found his desk, but that's precisely what he is doing under these regulations. Precisely what he's doing. It doesn't have to be an act of sabotage. One doesn't have to commit an act of violence. It just has to belong to an organization which, in the opinion of the police, is dedicated to violence. Mr. Speaker, I suggest to the House, Mr. Speaker, if the ship of state were in my hands, the first thing I would do would be get rid of some of the barnacles, like the honourable member.
Point of order. Point of privilege.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member rises on a point of order.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, it seems odd that one who advocates democracy is going to get rid of one of the duly elected representatives if he happened to have the power. That seems to be an odd.
The honourable member knows that being a Democrat, we would get rid of him by the democratic process, and that will happen. Mr. Speaker, I suggest to you, sir, that the action of the government constitutes a victory for the FLQ. This is exactly what they have wanted. They have wanted a... The honourable member knows that being a Democrat, we would get rid of him by the democratic process, and that will happen. Mr. Speaker, I suggest to you, sir, that the action of the government constitutes a victory for the FLQ. This is exactly what they have wanted. They have wanted a confrontation between themselves and the government of Canada. They want to be recognized as a revolutionary force with which the government of Canada must deal, and where the government of Canada must mobilize all its resources to declare war on them. They want the government and the people of Canada to consider that we are now engaged in a civil war with the FLQ. This is exactly what they want. And the Prime Minister very properly said this morning that these actions fall within the established pattern which is planned by revolutionaries. What do if you follow what has happened in other countries? Revolutionary movements begin by associating themselves with the disadvantaged in the community, by espousing their cause. Then they follows acts of violence and sabotage, which is responded to by police repression. That gives rise to demonstrations, maybe strikes, and further police repression, until bit by bit all the freedom and democracy we've had is pushed aside. We're in two armed camps. This is the polarization, and this is the confrontation which revolutionary movements in the world have sought to bring about. And the government, it seems to me, has fallen right into the trap. Government has done exactly what the FLQ hoped they would do. And all across this country, students and workers and alienated groups will be told, see what happens when we fight on your behalf. The government immediately brings in repressive measures. I'm saying to the government, that we cannot protect democratic freedom by restricting and limiting and destroying democratic freedom. I'm saying that the government has two tasks before it. I sympathize fully with their desire to cope with civil disturbance and with any anticipated sabotage. But I say to the government, they have two tasks to do if they're going to be successful in this regard. The first is that they must use the democratic process in seeking to stop sabotage, kidnapping, and acts of violence. That they must work within the framework of the democratic system. If we are going to tell people that we value democracy and that democracy is the way of dealing with social change, then we must use the democratic procedures and not revert on our hand to the very kind of violence which we are condemning on the other side. And the second thing I suggest to the government is that stringent measures, and I agree that stringent measures are necessary, taken through the democratic process, that stringent measures by themselves will not cure this situation. That you must go back to the root cause. A revolutionary movement has to have a base. Where's the base of the FLQ? The base of the FLQ lies in the disadvantaged and unfortunate people in the province of Quebec. Where is the support? Where is the support? Where is the support? Where is the support coming from?
Order, please. Order. Will the honourable member kindly resume his seat? I just wanted to perhaps assist him a moment. It seems to me that the honourable member who has the floor should be allowed to complete his speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would think that even with the War Measures Act having been proclaimed, that we still ought to have the right to express our views in this free Parliament. I'm suggesting to the government that no revolutionary movement can become a menace unless it has the support of the disadvantaged and alienated groups. Who are the people who are sympathetic to this? Not associated with it, but sympathetic. The La Palme workers. The La Palme workers who were callously and shamefully thrown out of work by a callous government without any thought to what was going to happen to these men. Sure. The unemployed, many of whom have now been out of work for a long time, and who plead in vain for some action by this government, and none is forthcoming. The people who live in slums, the people who live under appalling conditions. The Prime Minister says this doesn't excuse bombing. Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. But I point out to the Prime Minister that the best way to stop people turning to violence is to remove the root causes that make them frustrated with the democratic process.